Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a high-level look at some of the automation tools that we have available to us in the cloud. Now, again, this will be Google specific. Um, you will find similar ideas and similar technologies in the other providers, but this one is going to be very Google heavy today, just as a forewarning for you all. Now, one of the nice things about going to the cloud is that we can automate a lot of things, right? We can script everything out. We can pretty much do whatever we need to in a cloud-based environment. And one of the nice things that we have available to us, this is just agenda for some Google slides, is this notion of our infrastructure as code, or IAC. And what this really means is that you can take your various entities and turn them into, say, templates. And what this template will do is then allow you to very easily spin up a service or spin up a virtual machine or something like that, when what you're really doing is just defining it, say, as a YAML file or a configuration file of some kind, and you're just telling Google, hey, go ahead and create a new instance if we need to, say, scale up because we're getting a million requests and we weren't expecting to have to handle it. So let's create a bunch of new servers for our load balancer. Or. So basically, we have this ability to automate things, which is quite nice. Now, this idea of infrastructure as code is not new. Again, we are basically templating things out. Those are just going to be config files that can be easily scripted. Where things are going to be interesting for us are when we talk about ideas like the deployment manager, including services such as Cloud Build and Cloud Run. What we'll talk about in another video is keeping an eye on things, so monitoring and managing them, so basically logging and monitoring things like that. But what we mainly are going to care about here is the ability to template things out. Now, we did a lab demo at one point where we created some instance templates for our virtual machines. And I'm just trying to open another console here. But basically, if we were to say go into our compute engine, right, so let's go to compute. I can create this instance template, for instance, instance template, great joke. Um, Basically, what I can do is I can take some commonly known parameters and features, and again, this is not specific to virtual machines, though this is a nice little demo. I can create either through a GUI like you see here or through Bash or a PowerShell script. I can basically have a stored file template out what a VM actually looks like. Now, if I go ahead and create this instance, I'll delete it after we're done here, I now have a template. This template is now accessible to be scripted out later on. And what I would like to see, honestly, is if I can, gotta wait for it to spin up, I suppose, because I can't click anything in here. I actually want to see the code behind this for you all. So, where are we at? Equivalent rest. There we go. So you see a RESTful call. Instance template 1. What is the information regarding the disks? So it's persistent. What's the source image? Here we're using Debian Buster. What's the size of the particular hard drive? What is the network interface configured as? Basically, what you're seeing here is a RESTful call to create a virtual machine using this template. And you could store this off as a YAML file or something like that and use some of the other commands that are available to us in Cloud Shell or through the gcloud command locally. Not really trying to go into detail on one versus the other, but the idea is that you can take pretty much everything you do in the cloud and script it out, which if you're a sysadmin, you probably love hearing stuff like that. If you go ahead and create things in, say, Windows Server, typically start playing around with that server manager, and at the very end, they give you the PowerShell chain of commands and commandlets to do that again later on, right? Basically the same idea here. But the other nice thing with this is that if we have a template, and again, whether it is an internal instance or if we're managing it ourselves, we can version them. We can automate things. We can share them. Basically, we can very easily build up our infrastructure from code. And another great thing here too is this last point. It's definitely worth talking about. If you have a disaster occur, disaster could be as simple as running out of money in your credits account and your project gets shut down and deleted and you don't notice that. Well, if you have a template handy, you can very easily rebuild things. Hopefully you have your data stored elsewhere so that you can, recover that as well. But different topic. Anyway, effectively, this is infrastructure as code. Something that is worth keeping an eye on as you kind of go through the various labs and go through the various demos that I'm doing with you all. Check to see what the equivalent code is. Oftentimes you get a little fine print, equivalent rest command or equivalent bash command, or something that's going to give you script level access to that thing that you just did. Okay, maybe it took you 20, 30, 40 minutes to do manually with a GUI. What if you have to do that 500 more times? Well, here's the command you run because you already did all that. It's been now effectively templated. So infrastructure as code is definitely a lovely idea to kind of keep in mind. Next up, let's talk about Cloud Deployment Manager. And this is basically how we enable infrastructure as code to kind of work. With this particular system, we're not really going to go into great detail on the deployment manager inside Google Cloud. We'll kind of talk about it at a high level. But what this thing does for us is that it takes these templates that we have created, it takes our RESTful calls that we have figured out, and it allows us to really just deploy those in Google Cloud. And it allows us to deploy our resources that, again, we have spent a lot of time building up, and now we just want to automate things. So what are some of the key highlights from this very advertisey type slide? You get consistency, which is great. If you have a template, you know it's going to be configured the same every single time you deploy it. There's no room for human error there, right? You have very specifically what it's going to be. You didn't misclick a checkbox, or you didn't pick Ubuntu 20 instead of 18 by accident because that's your decision there. And these are very easy to update, very easy to version, very easy to manage. And since this is template driven, it can be basically shoved up to the deployment manager and let run. Now you might be wondering, I know some of you probably have experience with other tools in this domain. Google Deployment Manager is our internal one here, and I say our, inside Google Cloud. But you might have experience with Terraform or Puppet or Ansible or any of these other tools where you can very easily deploy things. I haven't decided if I want to do that yet for this class, but there is a lab where I'm considering having you play around with Kubernetes and Terraform because it's kind of an interesting thing to do. Basically using an extra tool to deploy things. I guess we should take a quick look at the deployment manager just to see what is available to us. I don't have it deployed on this project yet, but basically kind of the key here is that if you are comfortable with one of these other ones, you can bring that into this environment as well. So one of the things that I want to kind of end with today is when we start talking about automation, deploy marketplace solution. Okay, so we could use a pre-baked solution. It's been a hot minute since I've gone into this interface. If you want to deploy Kafka, if you want to deploy Mongo, we have basically pre-existing templates in the marketplace that you can try out, or we can actually programmatically use this as well. And just looking to see where we would add our template. Yeah, so if I were to add a composite type, I could just very quickly drop one of my templates up here and it would deploy nicely. One of the other things I want to talk about here, though, is what some of these templates can look like. So I will do a demo and the video will probably be linked pretty closely here on Cloud Run and deploying something with that. But I am kind of intentionally not going through the templating language because, it can depend on the fields that are needed. I showed you the RESTful call that was created for virtual machines. This one here is for our ever-present monolith to microservice demo project. But this is colors are fine. This is a YAML file for deploying to Kubernetes. So what this thing is doing is it is deploying this massive React application, and this is that web ordering, fake ordering system, the monolith type of thing that we've been playing with. And we have very specific fields here that match it. And if you are not familiar with YAML, it's a pretty straightforward way of specifying a configuration file. I mean, if you're used to .cfg files or XML config files, you should have no problem with this kind of environment. Basically, just have an attribute, colon, and then the value, and then things are spaced over to denote that they are part of a category. But here, what do we see? We see, I don't want to select this, we see metadata, we see our specification, we see the app name, we see where we're pulling the image from, we're seeing the port, and again, this is a Kubernetes/Docker specific YAML file, but it provides an example of what a template can look like. And we would just basically upload this and deploy it. Anyway, I hope this was useful for you. As always, this is always fun for me to talk about. So we'll get into some nitty-gritty IAC, yeah. I was going to call it IOC, but that doesn't make any sense. So we'll get into some demos with this to get you comfortable with that. But basically, the key takeaway is we're templating things out. And regardless if you're using the cloud or not, that's something you should probably be doing anyway. So hope this was useful. See you next time.